Hello, my name is Reana Merasty. I am Woodlands Cree from Barrenlands First Nation. I completed my Master's of Architecture at the University of Manitoba in 2021. And since then, I've been an architectural intern with Number 10 Architectural Group. On top of my professional work, I also do a lot of advocacy work out within the community. I am the Manitoba Regional Director on the Royal Architecture Institute of Canada Board. I am the chair of the Welcoming Winnipeg Committee with the City of Winnipeg, which looks at renaming historical markers and creating place names to reflect Indigenous histories. I'm also a sessional instructor in the University of Manitoba Department of Architecture in their master's program, where I teach Being a Good Relative, the Indigenous approach to the architectural process. Among all of that, I'm also someone that really likes to get out into community and talk to youth on the importance of Indigenous architecture and also influence the next generation to pursue a career in architecture. So I'm really happy to be here. And I wanted to give you a little bit of brief overview of what will be discussed today. So Wehwehneh Bahgahkinahgohn, or It Is Visible, is a project with Southern Chiefs Organization to transform this iconic Hudson Bay Company heritage building in downtown Winnipeg to a facility for economic reconciliation and reclamation, specifically for First Nations in Manitoba. Today, I will share the inherent process of Indigenous architecture and how it can contribute to the well-being and representation of First Nations in Manitoba. Additionally, I will share how this process promotes the importance of environmental and sustainability strategies to the best of my abilities. So just an introduction, every time I talk about my work, it always stems from who I am and where I came from. So I am Nihiyaw, which means Woodlands Cree. I come from Barrenlands First Nation, which is signatory to Treaty 10 in Northern Manitoba. And it's also traditionally known as Kisipikamak, and refers to the North Shore of Reindeer Lake in Northern Manitoba. So I've always been around the land and I've always been around community. And when I was growing up, I spent every single summer and at times went to school within my community. And I spent most of my summers with my grandparents. My Kugamin Papa is what I called them. And they pretty much shaped my whole adolescence and who I am today. I spent a lot of times fishing, hunting, trapping, eating caribou meat, fish, and living off the land. But it was also a way that I got introduced to traditional Indigenous architecture as I helped build log cabins with my grandpa. And we resided on an island on Reindeer Lake for the majority of the summer. And that island didn't have any running water. It didn't have any electricity. And we were just able to live off the land that entire point of time. And I still go back as much as I can. As you can see on the right, it's kind of evolved into my time today, and I still try to get out into the land as much so that I can. This image that you see here is a map of that community. You can kind of see Treaty 1 at the bottom, and then my community is all the way up along Reindeer Lake on the north point, because Reindeer Lake borders both Saskatchewan and also Manitoba, and I reside at the northernmost point of that. For context, it takes about a 16-hour drive from Winnipeg, where you then park your car, and you take a 3-hour boat ride to the community. So it's a very remote, but I always get reminded of my own community and how I grew up. So Southern Chiefs Organization represents 34 Anishinaabe and Dakota nations and is what now known as Southern Manitoba, and more than 87,000 citizens. We at Number 10 have had the privilege of working with some incredible leaders at SCO, such as Grand Chief Jerry Daniel, CEO Joy Kramer, COO Jennifer Moratre, and Senior Business Analyst Ryan Baer. This project would not be possible without these individuals, and they are pretty much at the forefront of this entire project. And the image that you see here is a design that was created by Sean Vincent of Vincent Design, which translated each of the 34 communities of SCO and their beadwork patterns into one. And so this has since become the symbol of this entire project, and a good segue into more of the information of Wehwehneh. So just a little overview. First, we'll get into the history of the Hudson Bay Company and their relationship with First Nations. Second, we'll get into Indigenous architecture and economic reconciliation and reclamation. Third is adaptive reuse, applying Indigenous principles to sustainability. And then the project itself and the redevelopment of Winnipeg's historic Hudson's Bay building. To start off, the Hudson's Bay Company is one of the oldest incorporated joint stock merchandising companies in the English-speaking world. HBC was a fur trading business for most of its history, a past that is intertwined with the colonization of British North America and the development of Canada. An often invisible Canadian narrative is the HBC's complex history with First Nations, spanning more than 350 years. First Nations were integral to the company's success, and many of the original people of Turtle Island were critical to the fur trade. And this image that you see here is one of the original maps of the Hudson's Bay Company, which references a lot of the communities, First Nation communities that you see today. Rupert's Land, which represented 1/3 of what is now known as Canada, was the inclusive commercial domain of the Hudson's Bay Company and the primary trapping ground of the fur trade. The territory was named after Prince Rupert, the HBC's first governor. King Charles II granted a royal charter to the HBC, giving complete control to the territory. No thought was given to the sovereignty of many First Nations that have lived there for centuries. For 200 years, the HBC built trading posts on most major waterways. By 1870, there were 97 posts in Rupert's Land. The fur trade also made possible the spread of Anglican and Catholic missions into parts of its territory. And one of those posts was in my own community. These images were received from the Hudson's Bay Archives documenting the community in the late 1800s. And it was from a diary of one of the settlers, James McDougall. And these are his own images from 1892 to 1894. And this water that you see, or this image that you see on the right, is on top of the frozen lake of Reindeer Lake. And at the top is what is my community now. The post, previously known as Lac de Brochet, was established in 1859 on the northeast shore of Reindeer Lake. The post was changed to Brochet in 1950, and in 1959, Brochet became a northern store. I have a complex history with the HBC, as you can see. As someone whose community was directly impacted by the Catholic mission, and as a result, the community has since been predominantly Catholic, with a little trace of Cree traditions or ceremonies. The practice of trading furs is still also prevalent within my community. My grandfather, Ralph, which you saw a little image of at the beginning, to this day still traps and trades his furs for his income in the winter. In the winter, he usually traps rabbit, mink, lynx, and several other animals and then he trades them at the Thompson tables in Thompson, Manitoba, where he receives most of his income in the winter. And I've had the privilege of witnessing a lot of this work that he still does to this day. And he's nearly a little over 70 years old, and he's still out and about on the land, providing for our family. Now on the point of Indigenous architecture. Indigenous architecture, as you can see, is very much inherent to me. I understand that buildings can reflect important aspects of Indigenous peoples' respective cultures, societies, geographies, environments, and also spiritual beliefs. And I see it as at times an extension of myself and who I am, but also of the communities that I get to work with. And it's really important that I become a voice for them through architecture. To me, Indigenous architecture is a process of reclamation, decolonization, and placemaking. Through reclamation, it is a way of acting on the land back movement and giving autonomy to Indigenous peoples after having their lands and sovereignty stripped from them. Through decolonization, it involves moving from a Western way of thinking to an Indigenous way of thinking. Through placemaking, Indigenous architecture is dependent on a specific nation or community and all things that live within and all the practice that stem from that place. And what I'm about to show you is some principles that would serve as constant reminders within your own practice. The first one is by Patrick Stewart, who is a Niska architect out of the West Coast, which defines Indigenous architecture as a process that intertwines with location, identity, and protocols, and is described through respect, relationships, relevance, reflection, reciprocity, redistribution, and also responsibility. And this was included within his PhD dissertation on Indigenous architecture, which is a very good read, and I would recommend looking into. The second is by Wanda Della Costa, who founded the Indigenous Design Collaborative at Arizona State University and was one of the first Indigenous women to become an architect in Canada. Created the Indigenous Placekeeping Framework that encompasses an architecture that is rooted in reciprocity, is place-based, community-led, and also process-based. Another one is the design process as defined by several Indigenous architects who wrote on Indigenous procurement requirements with the Canadian Architect magazine, which includes meaningful engagement, profession, and community lift, communication and transparency, and local equity, which all encompasses our process as designers and how we build a building. In a survey in America, Indigenous participants were told to describe one thing architecture can give to Indigenous peoples. And this is what a few of those participants stated. I would ask the discipline of architecture to educate and inform future and present practitioners that architecture is not meant to be a model of reconciliation. More opportunities for Native American architects to express their culture and heritage through architecture and interior design. It would be to use architecture to express the ideals of Indigenous people and take the time needed to develop design solutions that embody Indigenous people and their customs. Also in this process and also in my education, I created my own 7 guiding design principles that serve as reminders as I pursue architecture as a First Nations young woman. And those principles are as follows. The first is to honor the land, connect with what is existing, and be heartfelt in your intentions, and overall listen, feel, and learn. The second is practicing humility and understanding that we must self-reconcile with the elements around us and realize that the land is greater than us. The third is the process of place, understanding the local conditions and adhering to the climate environment of that area. The fourth is treading lightly, being gentle and sensitive to your surroundings and having a positive impact. The fifth is bringing light for energies, having those visible connections be created, and presenting the landscape and the interwoven ecology that you see around you and within that building. The sixth is practicing reciprocal actions, giving back 10 times more than you take, and for the well-being of the land that surrounds you. And overall, the seventh is practicing hard work. So creating with a kind heart and a strengthened mind and also a positive spirit. Now on the section of adaptive reuse. The following was in collaboration with Number 10's Net Zero Knowledge Community on adaptive reuse and also the building's embodied carbon. Indigenous people have always been at the forefront of climate action, but alternately, Indigenous people are the most disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. Our ancient and intergenerational Indigenous knowledge prefaces the importance of seeing ourselves as humans as equal to all of creation and having a deep connection to the land. This knowledge is responsive to the natural world and makes it ideal for developing and advancing meaningful climate solutions. Believing it is the responsibility of all to include Indigenous communities within these solutions. And it's the role of the architect that is very prevalent in this situation. The design and architectural community plays a significant role in climate action. We can be stewards of the built environment and have the power to create sustainable, healthy, and livable spaces that promote the well-being of people and also the planet. The adaptive reuse of existing buildings has a unique opportunity to reduce carbon emissions. We are in a critical time where carbon reductions are not a future thought, but of a now. And there's this quote that I wanted to highlight: when you save matters, when you build matters, what you don't build matters more. Embodied carbon refers to the carbon emissions associated with materials and construction process throughout the building's life cycle. If you were to construct this building today, it would require 14,912 tons of CO2 total embodied carbon, which would equate to over 15,000 hot air balloons by volume. It would require over 11,000 cross-Canada road trips and over 996,000 trees planted to offset its carbon emissions. As I mentioned before, this was the largest reinforced concrete structure of its time in the 1920s. The use of existing buildings generate significantly lower emissions than new construction, typically 50 to 75 less than new buildings can generate. The Southern Chiefs organization has been championing several initiatives and opportunities for their communities to generate these lower emissions. The first one is the opportunity to diminish environmental impact through their processes. When the salvaging began last year within the building, SCO hired several First Nations youth to assist in cleaning up the building. This cleanup diverted over 300 metric tons, or over 50% of waste from landfills. Cardboard, wood, and metals were recycled, and salvaged lumber was donated to Pitikwe Skate Park, and other items were donated to local businesses and organizations. As you can see on the right, top right, that is Pitikwe Park, which means come in, and is an inclusive and community-led initiative for youth in downtown Winnipeg. Another program is Mi'kmaq Connect, which is led by SCO's Economic Development Corporation. The program offers employment opportunities for First Nations skilled trades workers to be part of the renovation of this historic building. These employment programs are also in conjunction with and fully supported by PCL Construction. And I think it's just a complete honor to be able to provide employment to our First Nations relatives and also build capacity within our own communities. In the sense of operational carbon, SCO will be championing environmental sustainability. The building's new technologies will result in a 35% reduction in energy consumption and a 81% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Additionally, conservation principles will be incorporated throughout the renovation. Now on to what I think everyone has been waiting for. So the project was given the name Wehwehneh Bahgahkinahgohn, which means it is visible in Anishinaabe and is the redevelopment of Winnipeg's historic Hudson's Bay building. The name itself signifies representation and being not just seen, but also heard, and also having a significant impact on an economic development, which is what this visibility was never something that we had before. This is something that we fought for as Indigenous people, to have our stories be represented. And I think it's significant that this space will be one of the largest facilities in downtown Winnipeg. The building was one of HBC's flagship stores, and the 650,000 square foot store opened in 1926. It was the largest poured reinforced concrete building in Canada when it was built. And this image that you see on the right is it during construction from the Hudson's Bay archives. The building became a significant department store, being the source of many memories. It has been part of our city's narrative for 100 years. Our hope is that this development will create meaningful memories and experiences in the same way. We've heard a lot of these stories through our own consultant process, but also we've heard a lot of these stories when we announced this significant trade between the Hudson's Bay building and also SCO. We've heard of all the paddle wheel stories, meeting underneath the clock, and apparently the delicious jello that was in the paddle wheel restaurant, which I never got a chance to taste, but I'll take your word for it. The building has several protective elements, including the limestone cladding on the outside, canopy that spans from Memorial Avenue to Vaughan, the beacon on the roof, and the bronze frame entrances on the main floor. So we have to be working within the inside, but have very minimal installations on the outside and impact on the outside. Just a disclaimer that this project is still in process and continues to evolve, thus the programs and their locations may change. Just an overview of the programs. Under one roof, there will be an array of amenities to support First Nations and downtown Winnipeg. There will be about 5 floors between a residential and assisted living, which would equate to over 300 suites, plus their own associated amenity spaces. Within the first few floors, it will feature a Southern Chiefs Organization office, a childcare center, a ceremonial and commemoration circle, a redevelopment paddle wheel restaurant, an Indigenous cafe, a museum reclamation and decolonization center, a health and wellness center, which will govern both Western and traditional medicines, and also a governance house, which will be associated with Southern Chiefs Organization's office. And then the roof will also be occupied, consisting of a childcare play area, lounges, walking track, as well as a communal garden. Due to its large floor plate, with very little natural light would be able to reach the center of the building. To resolve this, one of the main design moves was opening the center of the building, introducing a skylight, and creating an atrium that you can see in the center of this image. The skylight, which for context is the size of an NHL hockey rink, and we love to use that reference, is the highlight of the building and bring light deep into it. The atrium becomes the social and cultural heart of the building. The space becomes interior atrium walls that emulate warmth. The heart is surrounded by various wood fins that you can see stemming down from the top of the skylight along the walls, which act as ribs of the building. These walls have an opportunity to highlight each of the 34 First Nations of SCO, and you can see these relief patterns along the walls of these little triangles. Those are supposed to be areas where we can represent various stories and histories of those 34 First Nations. As you enter the atrium, you are captivated by color and patterning that is a visual expression of Anishinaabe and Dakota culture. This public space creates a strong sense of community, and this image that you see here is some extra space that is allotted to either the paddle wheel restaurant or the Indigenous cafe. And one thing that you can't miss within this image is the totem pole within the center. This was gifted by McGill University, who had a totem pole be made to represent the legacy of residential schools. And it was created by carver Charles Joseph of the West Coast. And he was able to come to Winnipeg to assist me and as well several members of SCO to repaint it, refurbish it, clean it off, and it has now been erected in front of the Leaf at Assiniboine Park. And then that will be its home for now until this project is completed. There are many spaces to sit, meet, and work, which will be integrated into an internal courtyard that transplants pieces of Manitoba's boreal and prairie landscapes. The vegetation will offer an opportunity to connect with nature in the city center. There are many areas to showcase the narrative and story of First Nations, but also take the time to highlight elements that have been spearheaded by a lot of SCO in their research and the development as a First Nations organization. Now I'd like to take the time to highlight some of the things and elements that I've personally been able to spearhead within this project. The first one is at the heart of the main floor is a ceremonial circle. Bringing together all programs within the building, it will be an opportunity to connect intergenerationally with the children from the daycare, the SEO office spaces, and all of the residential floors are able to come down here for various programs, but also various gatherings as well. This was also something that has been something that is very important for a First Nations designer to implement. And so I myself, as well as my colleague and also a First Nations architectural intern, Darian McKinney, have been working in conjunction and collaborating with each other on these projects. Another one of those, and one of the most important elements in the building, is the commemoration circle, which will house the names of children who did not make it home from residential schools and be a space that is tied to the museum, reclamation, and decolonization center. This space, as I mentioned, has been championed by myself, but also Darian McKinney, who is a member of Swan Lake First Nation, and it was prefaced by SEO that this be led and by First Nations people because of its sensitive topic. And so Darian and I have been working in collaboration with one another to bring this to fruition. The program features 5 elements and processes. The first 2 is the entryway, the third is institutions, the fourth is children, and the fifth is honoring survivors. And this would serve as kind of the beginning of the museum, reclamation, and decolonization center, and be a way to memorial and showcase the history of residential schools. The institution space is intended to reference the schools, sanatoriums, and is intended to be a heavy and compressed area. The space would utilize the qualities of bricks, which were common material for residential schools and represented colonialist architecture. Bricks were where stories and names were etched by students who attended the residential schools. And as you can see on the right, some of that etched bricks that were at the former Mohawk Institute residential schools, and you can see those marks left on those within that abandoned building. The weight of the bricks is felt in this compressed area and is a way and is draped over you and is intended to be a very weighted space. The institution space is a gateway and primer for the names of the children who did not make it home. The installation will showcase up to 10,000 names of children who did not make it home, with space for those that are yet to be discovered. This number will include not just those students who attended residential schools, but also those who passed while attending day schools and other non-recognized residential schools, and also sanatoriums or medical facilities. When we started this process, we thought the symbol of the star blanket would be the most appropriate inspiration. The star blanket is given as a symbol of respect, honor, admiration, but also as a symbol of protection. Looking into the process of the star blanket, it is constructed by a single pieces of fabric that are connected as an act of coming together to become one. And to receive a star blanket indicates that the giver holds you in very high esteem for your generosity and also your accomplishments. The blanket is also a symbol of warmth, nurture, and also safety. And it was important for us to be able to have it act as a way, a welcoming piece for those that enter into this facility. And combined with the blanket is that star blanket pattern, which then creates this organic and natural movement through this flow to create that blanket. The blanket would comprise of individual panels that are brought together to become one. The blanket is then draped over the visitors that enter into this space. The one on the left, you can see these interconnected pieces that all become one and how they kind of flow to create that organic and natural effect. And then creating this undulating structure to create that draping effect within that. Each panel would feature the name of those who have passed, their community, the school they attended, and their date of passing. These individuals will all be highlighted. Their names will be highlighted And it was also be an opportunity, an ability for members of the community to visit their relatives who have passed on. The space is intended to be the opposite of the institution space. Being a space that is of light, warmth, and tradition, the blanket is supposed to envelop each visitor and celebrate those who have passed. The material of these panels would also be the opposite of brick and be of copper, wood, and fabric, significant materials that many Indigenous people utilize. Again, this was in conjunction with another First Nations architectural intern, Darian McKinney of Swan Lake First Nation, who not just myself who developed this, but also he has also been very much tied to the significance of this piece and created a lot of the images that you see today. The project also addressed affordable housing and dire need for units in downtown Winnipeg. It includes more than 300 affordable housing units for families and post-secondary students and culturally safe assisted living units for First Nations elders. It is anticipated that more than 500 people will call this space home. Within that, we have a whole floor dedicated to assisted living units for our elders, which would include a smudging room, a large dining space, but as also be a way to interact with a lot of the members throughout the whole community. And I see this piece within these housing units as being a way to connect our community and intergenerationally. Each floor residential would feature a community room and ceremony room, which would offer space for those to practice their own traditions. The image that you see here is one of that community room, which will be a space for birthday parties, ceremonies, daycare, children events, and all of the sort. And it also has a view out into the atrium that you see on the left. And this would offer an opportunity for all of the perimeter suites to be able to experience the atrium itself. And also along these floors is a dedicated smudge or ceremony room on all of the residential floors as well, so we can have that tie to culture and ceremony as First Nations people. Wehwehneh Bahgahkinahgohn will create a vibrant focal point for the city and for First Nations across the country. It will transform Winnipeg's empty bay building into a catalyst for downtown renewal and a need source of optimism in the future of the city. This project will stand as an inspiration for all as we work towards reconciliation and be an aspirational source of pride for First Nations, who might see it as a model for the best of what the community can be. This facility for myself is one of the most important projects that I will ever be included on within my career. The relationship that we've had with Southern Chiefs Organization on this has one that was really been unique. The individuals that I mentioned at the very beginning, Joy and Jennifer, has become my aunties and relatives in this process. We've also been able to interact in various engagement sessions. I've interacted with youth, families, elders in this process, and the insurmountable support that our community has been given on this process is also very heartwarming to hear. I also want to address that also this project has developed a lot of biases and racism. Like this is something that I've experienced when I've heard it mentioned, when I've seen through various posts or media outlets. And this has an opportunity to be one of the most successful Indigenous projects within our city. And it's also included in a lot of other projects within the city that also have an opportunity to have that representation and reclamation to be had. One of those is obviously Wehwehneh, or the former Kapiong Barracks on Kenniston Boulevard. And also the Long Plain Urban Reserve and various other urban reserves within the city of Winnipeg have a significant opportunity to have their culture be represented in a very significant way. I just wanted to highlight that and end that off within that note. And then also I wanted to give a heartfelt thank you to Southern Chiefs Organization for the opportunity to work on this project. I also like to share that alongside my colleagues at Number 10, we also work with Builder Consulting, PCL, Crozier Kilgore and Partners, MCW Consulting, and also Tower Engineering. And so there is many people within our organization and also many organizations that, in my opinion, have been committing to this act of reconciliation. And I think this is the embodiment of that, and then this process. I know it's very significant as a young First Nations woman to be working on this, but it's also very significant to have the non-Indigenous population and the colleagues and people that I get to interact with on a daily basis truly support me, as well as my colleague Darian's work as First Nations people. And so I wanted to thank you for listening in on this project, and I welcome any questions which will be facilitated by Laura Ecclesay.
Well, thank you so much for that incredible presentation. I learned a lot, and I'm sorry to hear about the racism that you see when things are posted about this. I think that it's on anybody who witnesses that to not stay silent and not leave it to Indigenous people alone to address those moments when they arise. Just looking at some questions, if anybody has any, or lots of appreciation coming from the chat here. One of my questions is there a building that you admired when you were a kid that you were inspired by or that you think about at all to start?
In all honesty, that wasn't really something I recognized when I was younger. I didn't start thinking about architecture until maybe a few years into my university degree. And so I guess like one of the very first impacts that I understood, and that I was very influenced by was actually the Thunderbird House, because that was my first introduction to Indigenous architecture. That was my first time someone told me that there was another Indigenous person in architecture, and that was created by Douglas Cardinal. And he was one of the first Indigenous people to become an architect in all of Canada. And I think that introduction is what led me into this discovery of Indigenous architecture. And so I think about that building, which sadly is not doing its best lately. And I know there's a lot of people in community that are really trying to advocate for the upbringing and like renovation of that building. And so it could become back to being a source for a lot of the community in terms of our ceremony. So I hope that has an opportunity, but it's always something that I look back to.
Thank you. All right, we have a question in the chat coming to us from Kurt. So how will this building be heated and how will GHG reductions be achieved? So a double question.
Double question. Yeah, so the building is currently, we had like a pre-design energy report done by MCW. So the existing building is provided by a natural gas fire steamed boiler, and so all of the mechanical and electrical systems will actually be demolished in this process. And so all of that will be removed, and then some of the new heating and cooling systems will be provided by a network of VRF systems. So that is the best that I can describe within my capacity.
Very fair. We all have our roles to play.
Yeah.
How the next question is coming in from Cindy. Sorry, sorting through all of these amazing like accolades is just takes them a moment. Everybody's just so happy with what you shared here today. But the question is, how does Indigenous culture and leadership in your client group affect or change the design process?
I think that's honestly a really good question. I think it changes it in a variety of ways. The leadership itself, I will reference the project as a whole rather than design process. But leadership itself, I think it's very significant to know that that a lot of this along with Grand Chief Jerry Daniels, is that there's a lot of women at the forefront of this project, Indigenous women that are at the forefront of this project who really made it happen. And so that is not something that we hear every day. And so that has significantly affected a lot of the processes, and also battling a lot of the, I guess, the narratives that usually come from these male-dominated projects or within architecture, which is a harsh reality. And I believe that has significantly impacted the design process. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is also Indigenous culture in general. And so the people that within SCO have developed and included a lot of Indigenous ceremonies within pretty much every step of the process. And so within an architectural process, it's always like bam, 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 bam. Everything is done in such a quick amount of time. There's never time to reflect. There's never time to interact with the community. And so the way that I see Indigenous culture being tied to this project and this design process is done so in a very sensitive way. It's taking the time. It's taking the time to talk to people, relate to people, connect with the community, but also being able to create various milestones and ceremonies. For example, when the project was announced, I believe 2 years ago, there was a large water ceremony, there was a blanket ceremony, and there's various things that we have to do within this process. And it's not something that is very quick. So it's taking the time and being reflective in that, which has really significantly changed the design process, but also significantly changed a lot of myself and other people that are working on the project and how we think.
And then I forgot to unmute myself. All right, there's a question coming in from Heather. There was a quote earlier in the presentation relating to Indigenous architecture not being a form, act, or reconciliation. Would it be possible to unpack that statement?
Yeah. I think it's not just the way that I've unpacked that or reflected on it is that it's not just meant to be this only significant model, is that this gesture of this giving back is not just part of the process of reconciliation, but there's so much more deeper meaning behind it. When people always see it as reconciliation as being like the one be all D all, and like it's something that people just like think is a check mark, but it's really not. There's so much a different meaning behind it. There's the relationships, there's being meaningful in your intentions, there's being environmental and being sustainable in that process. And there's so much deeper things within that a lot of people don't understand within reconciliation. And also since the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action and all these other things that are coming out in this age of reconciliation, there's a lot of the times that people just be like, oh, we're going to remove it from our mission or values because it's already done. It's not, it's this ongoing process. And so the way that I've kind of interpreted that statement is that it's not just meant to be the model. There's so much more deeper meaning behind it.
Thank you. Deanna has a question. Is some inspiration for this project coming from the plans proposed for the old Eaton's building?
That is not something I really know. I believe it has been part of our discussions. I know that the old Eaton's building has been referenced in a lot of our design meetings. So I believe like little bits and parts have, but not in like fully, I would say, in short. So many questions. Oh my God.
Oh, I forgot to unmute again. Okay. Shauna says, I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk more about your thesis work. Have you been able to apply those principles and practice? And if so, what has been easier to do? What has been harder?
That is a great question. So my thesis was actually titled Wehwehneh Architecture for Our Kin. It was advised by the Indigenous scholar Sean Bailey at the University of Manitoba, and it was to look at the way that architecture can restructure the way that we think. So usually architecture is very human-based or human-centric, and I was looking into how it could benefit all of creation. And so that was the result of those 7 guiding design principles. And several of those I've been trying to implement within my own practice. A lot of them I've been able to use and provide introductions to some of the projects that I've been working on. Some of those principles, obviously the hard work and treading lightly and trying to become more sustainable, environmental friendly, obviously ones are a little bit easier, but some of those that are more, I guess, like landscape or understanding of those have also been a little bit harder to implement, mainly because architecture is the way that it's struggled within my own thesis project, actually. Because architecture is supposed to separate you from the natural environment. It's supposed to create a wall because of the various envelope. The envelope is supposed to be high performance and just like completely be a barrier between the things that surround you. And the way that I was thinking about architecture is for you to feel that. I wanted you to feel the elements around you. I wanted it to be interact with the land and be able to smell it. And so that's something that I've still been struggling with to try to implement within my own practice. Obviously, I can't remove a wall within a building, so that doesn't work. But there's also various smaller ways that I've been trying to, such as being involved within the net zero knowledge community within my own office.
Nice. Could you provide information about features of the building, maybe excessive use of renewables, etc.?
I guess various features of the building is there's going to be a lot of opportunities with the skylight. Obviously, a lot of abilities to regulate the natural air within that area through various fans, through the skylight itself. And to be honest, this is not something I am very familiar in about various like high performance features within the building. That is something that has been championed by MCW consultants. But in terms of more of the high performance features, obviously the skylight is something that really needs to, and a lot of the heat gain within that area needs to be regulated. But also there's going to be a lot of opportunities within that own atrium space to have very high performance atrium walls, which is what we're thinking of right now. So that is still up for discussion.
All right, thank you. Carrie says, great presentation. Looks very amazing. Will there be space for community gatherings / presentations like the Circle of Life Thunderbird House or the former Nietzsche Commons?
I think the large atrium itself will be an opportunity for those large community gatherings. So just like how you see various like RBC Convention Center, this like atrium plaza level will have an opportunity to first of all be shut down from the public, but create a lot of community gatherings. So Southern Chiefs host a lot of forums, a lot of gatherings, a lot of conferences that are impacted by like health or CFS or like Indigenous planning. And so that central atrium space will be an opportunity for those gatherings and those presentations. We are implementing like even a wall that would have opportunities for projections. We're talking about consulting an AV and also audio lighting specialist to be able to have these gatherings within that area, and also a lot of opportunities for those interior atrium walls to be very soundproof for those events that are happening within that central atrium. And so that is something we're still discovering. We don't know as of yet what amount of people that can be housed within that area, but also obviously it serves as a very significant space because it has 2 neighboring restaurants. If there was able to be like a gathering within there, those restaurants can then supply food for those gatherings, and then vice versa. So a lot of that is in discussion.
Nice. Can you describe a bit about how you've engaged user groups and other stakeholder groups?
Yeah, we had about 3 different engagement groups. The first one, they were all catered to different elements within the building. The first one was engaging with youth. So this one was to address the youth occupants of the residential floors, but also some of the public programs along the main floors. And so that was one that we had. Each of these were about a day long or so. We had significant opportunities to do visual listening exercises, being able to respond to different materials, but also get their visioning on what really they need as young people. And most of them were university students. Some of them were just in high school. And so it's getting those impacts for that. Another one of those was significant families. So these were families in their like late 30s to late 40s, who had a number of children. And so these were to address a lot of the larger units within the residential floors, such as the 3 and the 4 bedroom, to make sure those were adequate, but also make sure that a lot of the amenity spaces were utilized. And then the third one was to reference with elders. So this one was to address the assisted living floors, as well as the ceremony and commemoration circle. So this one was a little bit more different because it's very interesting to interact with Indigenous communities. It's also a very sensitive thing. You don't want to show all of these ideas and being like, we answered everything that you wanted without really asking what they want first. And so it's structuring a conversation in a certain way where it's not very dominant by the architect or the designer, and really structuring the conversation in a way where they're leading it. And that's something that Indigenous community engagements have really been utilizing. And then I also want to note that some of the things that I've learned within this process is that a lot of Indigenous communities don't like the word stakeholders. We only use rights holders or communities within this process. So we never reference them as stakeholders.
Thank you for that insight. Okay, so the question is, this is an important hub for the city and indeed Turtle Island. So how will this be connected physically and spiritually with other key Indigenous places from a planning perspective?
Yeah, that is a great question. Um, I guess like connected spiritually or physically with other Indigenous places is mainly through the commemoration circle. And so we have an opportunity to have some various elements within that, such as the various bricks, but also sourcing different materials from different areas across Canada to bring together all of those communities that have been impacted by the residential school system. So that is one way that we've been trying to do that, or connect those communities. Another one is through the landscape of the main floor atrium space. So we have an opportunity to source various rocks or stones or landscape materials from each of those 34 First Nations within southern Manitoba. And those stones and those rocks and those elements will all be incorporated within the main landscape area of the atrium space to bring together all of those communities. And so that is really one way. And then another thing is what we wanted to implement is more specifically that area. So we're not really thinking about the Canada as a whole or Turtle Island as a whole. We're just mainly thinking about that area and how the HBC and their relationship with First Nations. And so we're really thinking about various installations and history walls and historical markers throughout the whole place to be able to tell that story. And so we're really thinking about that one specific space.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Do you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share? But first, I think there's one more question from the chat that just jumped in, but then I'll ask you for any final thoughts if that's okay. Do you feel that although the building is very colonial, it is in its architectural style, the fact that it is wrapped in limestone rock is special, rocks being so culturally and spiritually significant to Indigenous people?
Yeah, I personally think so. Although within its inception, its creation, it was a very colonialist building. But I see the stone on the outside as a very different impact or significance. Obviously, people can interpret it, and it's maybe different for other First Nations designers, not just myself. This is just something that I personally thought about, so I just wanted to preface that. But I do feel like the limestone or the tyndall that is on the outside is very representative of this area, and of like the surrounding community, and that's why a lot of Winnipeg is built from tyndall stone or limestone. So I think that is very special and significant. But also the way that we think about rocks and stone, it's really grounds us as Indigenous people, is usually the foundation for a lot of ceremonies. And it's also a way to ground who we are in terms of our practices. And so I do think that it's very significant, but also, as I prefaced, that maybe another person may think differently on this view. So thank you for that question.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that answer. Is there any final thoughts that you wanted to share before we wrapped this up?
Um, I think I've said it all. Um, where, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I gave that disclaimer that this evolves based on what we want, or what the community wants, and so I just wanted to preface that this project will continue to evolve. Spaces will change, programs will change, but this is just where it is right now. And I truly could not, I'm a small piece within a puzzle of this entire project with number 10, Builder Consulting, PCL Construction, CKP, MCW, Tower. And so there's a lot of people within this project that are really putting their all. And I just wanted to preface that I'm just a very small piece within the puzzle. But thank you so much for listening, and thank you for joining me today.